Hey, my name is Owen Callahan. I'm 29 years old, and I live in a narrow two-bedroom house on the edge of Millhaven, Indiana, a small city that sits between two interstates and doesn't get visited by anyone who didn't already know it was there. I work for a commercial cleaning company called Sable Facility Services. What that means is I show up to office buildings, warehouses, medical waiting rooms, and institutional lobbies after everyone else has gone home, and I make them look like no one was ever in them. I carry a cart. I wear a gray uniform with my name on the chest pocket. I empty waste bins and buff floors in clean restrooms in the kind of careful, methodical order that I learned from the job and then made part of how I think about most things. You go from the cleanest to the dirtiest. You never take a shortcut on the thing that actually matters. You do the job the same way every time, so it comes out right. I've been doing this for 4 years. Before that, I worked in a distribution warehouse, which was more money and harder on the knees, and I didn't do it well enough to stay. The cleaning work I do well. I know how to do it, and I don't mind the hours, and I like the part where you walk out of a building at 2 a.m, and it's the way it's supposed to be. Most people don't notice the work when it's done right. That's fine with me. Most things work that way. I wake up at noon or thereabouts, depending on what shift I'm finishing. I make coffee. I take a walk most days, the same 2 miles down Keller Avenue and back, because I learned early on that sleeping through the whole day makes everything heavier and moving for 30 minutes keeps the weight off. I eat lunch at home. I'm usually at the job site by 9 or 10 at night. I'm usually home by 3 a.m. I watch something on my tablet until I fall asleep. The apartment is quiet. I got used to quiet after my father died. That was 2 years before this story. A heart attack. Fast. Which is supposed to be a mercy, and maybe it is, but there's a particular kind of quiet that a house has after someone who was very present in it is gone, and you don't quite fill that with noise or routine. You just live inside it until it changes shape. The house we'd shared, his house, technically, the one I grew up in, I couldn't afford to keep after probate, so I moved to Millhaven for the work and got the rental on Keller and started over. I don't say this as a complaint. I'm telling you the shape of things before the shape changed. I don't date much. I don't say much about myself in the situations where dating might happen, which is part of why those situations tend to end early. A man who works nights in a gray uniform carrying a mop cart is easy to misjudge if you give someone enough time to misjudge you. I got tired of trying to explain myself at second dinners that weren't going to a third, and at some point I stopped trying, and at some other point I stopped noticing I'd stopped. The month this happened was February. February in Millhaven is the city's worst month. Not cold enough to be beautiful, not warm enough to be anything but gray and slow. I had a standing site I worked Tuesday through Saturday, a 6-story office building on Grant Street called Ellison Tower, which housed a mix of accounting firms and legal offices and a dental practice on the ground floor. I had been doing Ellison for 2 years. I knew every floor, every break room, every particular about the cleaning requirements in each suite. I could do the whole building in 4.5 hours without rushing. I did it in 4 hours and 15 minutes, because I did not rush, but I did not waste time either. That Tuesday in February, I was on the 3rd floor when I heard something I should not have been hearing in an empty building at 11 at night. Someone was crying. Not loudly. Not the way people cry when they want to be heard, the way they cry when they are very tired and have been holding it together since morning and did not quite make it to the car. I had a key to every suite in Ellison. I stood in the hallway for a moment and listened to figure out which door. It was the one at the end, a small accounting firm called Harwick & Associates. 4 people, 2 of whom I had nodded to in passing when they worked late enough for our hours to briefly overlap. I knocked. The sound stopped. A pause. Then, the building's open for another few minutes. I'm sorry, I'll be out. I work here, I said. Nights, I just wanted to make sure you were all right. A longer pause. I'm fine, she said, which is what you say when you are not fine, but have decided to manage it yourself. I stood there another second. In the cleaning business, you develop a policy about spaces that are occupied. You come back. You don't intrude. The standard thing would be to say okay and come back to this suite last and let her leave first. I almost did that. I had the cart handle in my hand, and I was already deciding what floor to skip to when I heard her take one breath that was not quite steady, and I thought about the building emptying around her, and one person left in it, at 11, on a cold Tuesday in February. I have extra coffee, I said through the door. From the cart. It's in a thermos, and it's nothing special, but it's hot. Another pause. Is this something you do often? She said. Offer coffee to people you find crying in offices? No, I said. First time. A short silence. Okay, she said. The lock clicked. She opened the door, and I saw her. She was in work clothes, a dark blazer over a blouse, both of them creased from a full day, the blazer missing one of its smaller buttons along the cuff. Her hair was light brown and had been pulled back neatly that morning, and by this hour had given up most of its structure. Her eyes were swollen slightly at the corners, and she had the particular expression of someone who has been professional in front of people all day and has used up the last of it. She was about 27. She was holding a folder against her chest like it was an anchor. She looked at me, the gray uniform, the cart behind me in the hall, the small thermos I was holding out, and she said, I'm sorry, I forgot someone would be cleaning tonight. You probably want to do this office. I'll do it last, I said. You should sit down. She looked at me for a moment. Something about the way she was standing, slightly braced, like she was prepared for me to say something that required defending against, shifted by a small degree. She sat down. Her name was Clara. Clara Voss. She told me that, unprompted, about a minute after she accepted the coffee, like she decided that giving her name was the least she owed someone who'd offered their thermos in a hallway. I asked what kind of accounting the firm did. Estate and trust work, she said. I nodded. She asked how long I'd worked the building, and I told her 2 years, and she said she'd been at Harwick for 11 months, and had probably never looked carefully enough at who kept the place clean. I said most people didn't. She said that wasn't a good thing. I said no, probably not. I sat in the other chair in her office, not behind the desk, just the client chair by the window, which I pulled a few feet closer so the conversation didn't have furniture in the middle of it, and I let her talk if she wanted to, and I didn't ask questions about the things she'd been crying about, because that was her information and she could keep it if she wanted. She didn't keep it. My mother, she said, after a few minutes. She's been in a memory care facility in Columbus for 2 years. I moved here for this job, and I told myself it was close enough. It's 4 hours. I drove up Saturday, and she didn't know who I was. She said this with the same flat, collected tone that people use when they have practiced the sentence enough times that it no longer destroys them on contact. She knew my name. She just didn't attach it to me. She called me by my name and looked at me like I was someone from her past that she couldn't quite place. A pause. I drove back Sunday morning. I came in Monday and did my job. And tonight I just needed to sit here for a minute. I said, that's a reasonable thing to need. She looked at me. You're being very calm about this. It seemed like what was called for. Most people try to fix it, she said. They say things. I know a few things about watching someone change, I said. There's nothing useful to say. She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at the window, at the dark February street below. How do you know that? My father, 2 years ago. Not the same. It was fast for him. But I know what it is to be the one in the room. She nodded. She didn't say she was sorry, which I appreciated. She just let the information sit between us the same way I'd let hers sit. We talked for another 20 minutes. Not about grief, about other things. She asked about the route I ran through the building, genuinely curious. And I explained the logic of it. Clean to dirty, top to bottom. And she said that was more systematic than the way she approached most things. And I said it only worked because the building was the same every time. She said, "What happens when something's different?" And I said, "Then you adjust and keep going." She seemed to consider this. When she stood to leave, she gathered the folder and her coat and looked at me in the doorway. "Thank you," she said, "for the coffee, and for not leaving." "You were still here," I said. "So were you." She put on the coat. Is it weird to ask if you'll be here Thursday?" "I work late Thursdays. I could bring the coffee this time." I told her I was here Tuesday through Saturday. She said, "Thursday then." She came Thursday with a thermos of her own and an apology for the fact that it was from a drip machine at the office and not something better. I told her it was fine, and it was. We sat in her office again, same chairs, and talked for 45 minutes. She had questions about the building, not personal questions. Specific ones. Like how long the floor buffer took on each level, and whether the medical suite on one required different supplies, and what happened when an office left a mess that was over the standard scope. I answered all of them. She wrote some of them down. I asked why she was writing them down. "Because I want to understand what I'm surrounded by," she said. "I try to understand things." I said, "What's the folder you always carry?" She looked at the folder on the desk. "Work I should have taken home. I never quite make it out the door with it. Maybe you don't want to take it home." She looked at me for a second. "That's probably right," she said. "I'm working on that." By the third Thursday, she brought good coffee from the place on Grant Street that stayed open until midnight and 2 paper bags with sandwiches in them. And she said, "I don't know if you've already eaten." And I said I hadn't. And she said, "Good. Me either." And we ate at her desk with the building quiet around us. I noticed, that third Thursday, that she did not hunch her shoulders when she talked to me anymore. That the folder was on the credenza behind her instead of held against her chest. That she had been the one to pull the client chair closer this time, without waiting for me. We talked about her mother again that night, but differently than the first time. Not the crisis of the Saturday visit, but the particulars of who she was before the memory began to go. Her mother had been a librarian. Organized in the specific, private way that people who work with systems become organized, where everything has a logic, but the logic is your own and not always visible to others. Clara said, she used to put books back on the shelf by the color of the spine. Not alphabetically, not by subject, just color. She said it made the room feel like it was breathing. She said this looking at the window rather than at me, and then she said, "I thought it was strange when I was little. Now I think she was right." I said, "About what?" "About rooms needing to breathe." She picked up the coffee cup. "Some things shouldn't be too organized." I thought about my route through the building, always the same, top to bottom, clean to dirty, no variation. "I don't know," I said. "I like a system." "I know you do," she said. "But you stopped at my door on a Tuesday night when nothing in your system required you to. So you also know when to break one." I didn't have an answer for that. She seemed satisfied not to need one. The second week of March, she was not on the third floor when I arrived Thursday. I went through the fifth floor and the fourth, and came down, and she still wasn't there. At 11:40, I was cleaning the second floor break room when I heard her footsteps in the stairwell. I had learned the particular sound of them by then, quicker than most, purposeful, without rushing, and she appeared in the doorway of the break room in her coat and her work clothes, her hair pinned back imperfectly, and she said, "I know I'm late." The thing in Columbus ran long. I said, "You don't have to be here." "I wanted to be," she said. She sat on the small couch along the break room wall, which the building's tenants used on ordinary days and which I cleaned every Friday morning. She sat in her coat and pulled her knees up and said, "She told me today about a man she had loved before she met my father. She told me the whole story, his name, where they met, what kind of person he was. She told it with total clarity, every detail like she'd been keeping it." Clara paused. She did not know I was her daughter, but she told me that story like she trusted me. I stopped what I was doing. "Maybe she did trust you," I said. Clara looked at the window. "That's a kind thing to say. It's not meant as kind. She didn't need to tell that story. She chose to. Something about you made her want to." She turned that over. After a moment, she said, "I don't know what to do with the visits, most of the time. I drive up and I sit with her, and I try to be the person in the room with her, whoever she thinks I am, and not grieve too much in front of her for the person she used to be." A pause. Today was the first time a visit felt like something other than loss. I sat down across from her in the other break room chair. "That counts," I said. She looked at me. "You say that a lot." "It's usually true." She leaned back and closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, the careful look was still there, but something behind it was quieter. "I don't have anyone else I talk to like this," she said. It came out not as a declaration, but as a plain observation, the way she observed everything. "I want you to know I noticed that." I said, "I know." I finished the floor around her, working in the outer sections of the break room while she sat, and she didn't say anything else, and didn't need to. And when I was done, I sat back in the chair and we stayed in that room for another 20 minutes without talking much, and the building was still and quiet around us, and that was all right. There was a thing I had been careful not to do since the first Tuesday, which was let myself think about her between Thursdays. I was careful about it in the same deliberate way I am careful about anything that could become a mistake if I am not attentive. I am a man who works at night in a building she works in during the day, and I wear a gray uniform with a name on the pocket, and I am not someone who mistakes a kindness for an invitation. But on the walk home the third Thursday, in the cold, I was not successful at being careful. I thought about the specific quality of her attention when I was talking, the way she oriented her whole self toward the conversation, not just her face, the way she asked questions that meant she had been listening to the last thing I said. I thought about the fact that she had bought the sandwich. I walked 2 miles home and did not stop thinking about it, which told me something I wasn't sure what to do with. I decided to do nothing, which is the decision I make most often and is usually right. The following Tuesday, I was on the second floor when I heard footsteps in the stairwell that were not the particular footstep of an empty building. I turned. The stairwell door opened, and it was her. "I know it's Tuesday," she said. I had to come back for the folder. She held it up. She was still in her coat and work clothes. Then she looked at me in the gray uniform under the fluorescent light, and her expression shifted into something I couldn't read. "I keep running into you in uniform." I looked down at the uniform. "I'm on the clock." I know. She stood there. I keep meaning to. I don't know. I feel like I should explain at some point that the way we know each other is from me crying in my office and you handing me coffee through a door. That's a strange place to start. It's a fine place to start, I said. She tilted her head slightly. You work at 11 at night. You wear a gray uniform, you carry a thermos and a mop cart, and you know the exact coefficient of friction required to buff a concrete floor without marking it. She said it without judgment. She was listing things, the way she listed everything, to understand them. And you're the most. You're easy to talk to. That's a weird combination. I said, the floors need someone to know that about them. She looked at me for a second. Then she said, I've been trying to decide if I should say something. I've been drafting it in my head since the Sandwich Thursday, and I haven't quite gotten there. The stairwell was very quiet. The building was empty around us. I was going to ask, she said, whether you'd want to get dinner. Not here. Somewhere that isn't an office at 11 at night. A pause. And I know you work nights, so I didn't know if that was even possible, and I didn't want to presume anything about your... Yes, I said. She blinked. Yes, I said again. That would be good. She exhaled. Then she looked down at herself, the long coat, the work blouse, the sensible shoes, and said, I'm in my work clothes. I looked at her, at the coat and the blouse and the shoes, and the way she was standing in a stairwell at 11:15 at night, still in the clothes she'd put on at 8 in the morning, holding a folder she'd come back from home to retrieve, and asking a man in a gray uniform to dinner. You're already perfect, I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Something went very still in her face, and then very quietly fell apart. Not in the sad way from the first Tuesday, but in a different way. The way something goes when it has been held carefully for a long time and is finally set down. That is, she said softly, the kindest thing anyone has said to me in a long time. I said, it's just true. We went to dinner that Saturday. She picked a place she called low-key and unpretentious, which turned out to be a diner near the river that had been open since 1962. Booths with red vinyl seats and coffee that came without being asked for, and a laminated menu with photographs of the food. I was 20 minutes early because I am always early to things, and I sat in the booth and watched her come through the door in jeans and a sweater, and her hair loose the way it had never been at the office, and I stood up, which I noticed myself doing without deciding to do it. We ate and talked for 3 hours. I learned she had grown up in Columbus, same city as her mother's facility, and had taken the Millhaven job partly because of the professional opportunity, and partly because she couldn't be 4 blocks from her mother every day and stay functional. I learned she had a younger brother who called on her birthday and didn't call in between, and she had made her peace with what that meant about him. I learned she had wanted to be an archivist in school, and it somehow ended up in trust accounting, and she thought about the archivist thing sometimes when a client brought in a box of old documents. She said there was something satisfying about the ordering of things, about the idea that everything should have a place, and a notation, and a way of being found. I told her about my father, not the death, the person. He had been an electrician, a quiet man, methodical. The kind of man who could look at a dark room and know exactly what it needed. He had raised me mostly alone from the time I was 8 and my mother left, and he had not been warm in the conventional sense, but he had been steady and present, and the house had always been in working order, and when he died the house kept all its order, but lost its reason for it. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, he sounds like someone you could count on. I said yes. She said, that's rare. I said, I know. She was looking at me in the way she had looked at me since the first Thursday, which was the same look she gave to things she was trying to understand. Direct, serious, without affectation. It was not a romantic look in the usual sense. It was a look that said, I am paying attention to what is actually here. I was used to people not paying that kind of attention. I had never minded it, I'd told myself, and I had believed myself for a long time. What I understood sitting in that booth was that I had been wrong. I had minded it in a low, durable way I'd gotten so used to that I'd stopped identifying it as something that could change. I asked about the archivist idea. What would she have done with it if she'd gone that direction? She considered the question seriously, which she did with most questions, and said she thought she would have liked working with personal archives, not institutional collections, not libraries, but the boxes families accumulate. The documents that prove people existed and cared about things. She said there was an ethics to it, deciding what to keep, what to organize, what to let go of. She said most families don't know what they have until someone goes through it carefully, and most of it matters more than they realize. I said, that sounds like estate accounting. She stopped. Then she said, I hadn't thought of it that way. You're already doing it, I said. The organizing. The deciding what matters. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, you do that. Do what? You take something I say and find the part of it I hadn't seen yet. She turned the coffee cup in her hands. You've been doing it since the second Thursday. I said I wasn't sure I did it deliberately. She said, I know, that's why it counts. The check came and she reached for it. I said, I had it. She said she had offered the dinner, which was true. I said that was a technicality, which made her smile, small and quick, not for the room, just for me. We stood on the sidewalk outside, and the February cold was doing what it does in Millhaven, which is get into your coat if you stand still long enough. She had her hands in her pockets, and she was looking at the street. I want to be clear about something, she said, because I think I am still the way I am. She glanced at me. I will come at this carefully. I will probably not say things at the moment I should say them. I will carry folders I should take home. I will drive 4 hours to see my mother and drive back and go to work the next day and not tell anyone how it went. She paused. I'm telling you now so it isn't a surprise later. I stood there for a moment and thought about that. My job, I said, is to go through every part of a building, in order, and make sure everything is the way it should be. And the part that everyone ignores is that it doesn't stay that way. You do it again tomorrow, and the day after. It's not a problem to fix, it's just how it is. She looked at me. I don't need it to be fixed, I said. She came out of her coat pocket and took hold of my arm, just above the elbow, the grip quiet and certain. Okay, she said. We walked to her car. I waited until she'd driven out of the lot. I walked home in the cold and did not try to be careful about anything. There is a man named Reggie who works the Ellison loading dock, a maintenance supervisor in his 60s, who has been in the building longer than most of the tenants. He and I have a brief exchange most Tuesday and Wednesday nights when our paths cross at the service entrance. He is always finishing something when I am starting, and he always asks how the floors look, which is a joke between us because Reggie has never cared about the floors, and I have never pretended otherwise. One night, about 3 weeks after the diner, Reggie held the service door for me and said, The accountant on 3 has been smiling on her way out. I said, that's probably a good sign for the economy. He said, son, I have been in this building for 15 years, and that woman has had a standing 3-mile walk to her car that she took in a straight line. He paused. Last 2 weeks, she walks slow. She looks at her phone. She smiles at it. He looked at me. That's not about the economy. I held the door. You're very observant, Reggie. I know what I see, he said. You going to do something sensible about it, or are you going to keep being reasonable? I said I thought I was making progress. Reggie said, don't think so hard about it. You're already doing the right things. Just keep doing them. The thing that arrived in the 4th week of March arrived at a Wednesday evening Harwick and Associates client meeting that Clara mentioned in passing, which she described as routine, which it was, until it wasn't. I heard about it Thursday, when she was already at Ellison when I arrived at 9. She was at the reception desk in the lobby instead of on her floor, and the way she was sitting told me something had happened. The folder was in her hands again, not on the desk. There's a client, she said, when I sat in the chair across from the reception desk and waited. Harold Mercer. He's 72. He inherited a commercial property from his brother's estate, and he's been with the firm since before I got here. He's been letting someone manage the property for him, a nephew. And I found discrepancies. A lot of them. 18 months of them. The nephew's been skimming, I said. Taking fees for work that wasn't done. Understating rents. Redirecting a maintenance account. About $60,000 over 18 months. She paused. I found it. I reported it to the partners, and today the nephew called the firm and implied that if it went further, he would make it difficult for me personally. He mentioned that I'm an outsider, that I'm new, that I don't understand the relationship. A pause. He knows someone at a firm in Columbus. He implied he could make things complicated for my professional record. I looked at her. Kenny? No, she said. I know the work I do. The documentation is complete. She set the folder down. But he's Harold's nephew, and Harold's 82. I'm sorry, 72, and Harold is currently inclined to believe the explanation his nephew gave him, which is that I made an error. She looked at me. I did not make an error. I know, I said. She looked up. You don't know. You haven't seen the work. No, I said. But I know you. She was still for a moment. Then she said, the partners are meeting with Harold tomorrow. I'm presenting the documentation. I'm asking for one of them to be in the room. Good, I'm not afraid of it, she said. I needed to say it out loud, to someone who wasn't going to tell me to be diplomatic about it. You found the thing, I said. You do the job the same way every time so it comes out right. $60,000 doesn't lie. She exhaled. Something in her shoulders reset slightly. It doesn't, she said. How's the coffee tonight? She looked at me. It's terrible. Good, I said. Then we can complain about it. She laughed. It was not the first time she'd laughed with me, but it was the first time it was about something specifically bad. And it was the kind of laugh that people produce when they are no longer alone with the thing they've been holding. The meeting with Harold the next morning lasted 2 hours. Clara walked me through it Thursday evening, the documentation she laid out, the specific items she identified, the moment the partners she'd asked to attend. A woman named Sylvia Harwick, one of the firm's founders, looked at the nephew across the table and said, very quietly, that she had reviewed the work and the numbers were accurate, and the matter would be referred to an attorney. The nephew left the meeting early. Harold stayed. He was quiet for most of it, and at the end he shook Clara's hand and said thank you. And she said, you're welcome. She told me this in the same systematic way she told me things, from beginning to end, in order. When she finished, she said, he has a daughter he hasn't spoken to in 4 years because of the nephew. I'm going to see if there's a way to address that in the estate work. You can build that in. You can do that? I said. If Harold wants it. I'm going to ask. She paused. Someone should have asked 2 years ago. I looked at her. I had been looking at her all night, which was not a new thing, but that evening I was less careful about it. "What?" she said. "Nothing," I said. "I'm just glad the diner was open." She looked at me for a second. Her expression went to the quiet one, the one she used when she was deciding whether to say the thing she had already decided. "Owen, yeah, I think about you all day," she said. "The way I think about things I want to come back to. The folder I actually do want to take home." She paused. "I wanted you to know that." I got up from the client chair and went around the desk, and she turned in her chair, and I kissed her. It was unhurried, and she had both hands flat on the desk, and then she didn't. And it tasted like the bad coffee and the particular relief of a long thing finally being said. When I pulled back, she looked at me in the way she looked at everything she was trying to understand. Direct and serious. "The uniform is fine," she said. "I know," I said. "I told you." She put her head briefly against my shoulder. Outside the window, Grant Street was empty and lit yellow, and the February gray had, I noticed, started turning somewhere toward the first possibility of spring. I stood there and let the building be quiet around us. 5 months later, Millhaven is warmer than it has any right to be in July, and Clara's kitchen window has herbs in it that she planted in April and is kept alive through a combination of attention and research. Which is how she keeps most things alive. The mother is no different. That is not a thing that gets better. But Clara drives to Columbus every 3 weeks instead of whenever the guilt gets heavy enough, and sometimes she calls me from the road on the way back. Not to say anything particular, just to have the drive be less quiet. I pick up every time. The folder came home, not all at once, incrementally, one project at a time, until one Thursday she arrived at Ellison and was empty-handed, and she said, "I finished it at home," and said it like it was a small ordinary thing, which it was and which it wasn't. Reggie stopped me at the service entrance last week and said, "You did the sensible thing." I said, "Eventually." He said, "That counts." He held the door. The gray uniform still hangs by my door. I put it on 5 nights a week, and I go to work, and I do the floors in the right order, and I do the job the same way every time, and I walk out of the building at 2 or 3 in the morning into whatever the weather is. This has not changed. I am not a different person. But there is something I understand now that I didn't understand a year ago, which is that a man can keep a building in perfect working order every single night and go home to a house where the order means nothing and not know what is missing because he has never been shown it clearly. What I was shown was this: a woman in a work uniform with her hair coming down, crying quietly in an office that needed cleaning, who asked me a month later to dinner and said sorry for the clothes she was wearing. And what I understood in that stairwell, what I still understand, every morning when I get home and the herbs are in the window and her coat is on the hook that wasn't there before, is that the right person doesn't need to be dressed up for the moment to be right. It is already right. You just have to stop and see it.